This video is brought to you by Brilliant. On Sunday, Germany held state elections in the eastern state of Brandenburg. While the AfD actually underperformed the polls, coming second to the SPD, they performed remarkably well with young voters and were by far and away the most popular party with 16 to 24-year-olds. Something similar happened at the other state elections earlier this month, where massive pluralities of young Germans in both Thuringia and Saxony voted for the AfD. So, in this video, we thought we'd take a look at what happened in Brandenburg a couple of days ago and try our best to figure out quite why the AfD are doing so well with young people.
Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos.
So let's start by taking a look at what happened at the Brandenburg elections. According to the final results, Olaf Scholz's SPD came first with 31% of the vote, the AfD came second with 29% of the vote, the New Saar Wagenknecht Alliance or BSW came third with 14%, the CDU came fourth with 12%, and the Greens, Left Party and the FDP all fell below the 5% threshold, and so failed to win any seats. For context, Brandenburg uses what's known as a mixed-member electoral system, not dissimilar to the one used at the federal level, where 44 of the 88 MPs are elected in constituencies by first past the post, and the remaining 44 are elected by PR to make the overall composition of the parliament better reflect the popular vote. Had the Greens, or one of the other parties, won a constituency seat, they would have been exempted from the 5% threshold, but the SPD and AfD ended up winning all the constituency seats, with the AfD winning 25 and the SPD taking the remaining 19. Obviously, this was a pretty terrible result for the Greens and the FDP, especially given that the Greens won 11% of the vote in Brandenburg 5 years ago, and that the FDP won just 0.8% of the vote this time around, down from 4.1% in 2019 and below even niche parties like the Animal Protection Party. Conversely, this was a pretty great result for the SPD, and a lot better than the results we saw a few weeks ago in Saxony and Thuringia. The SPD's relative overperformance here is down to at least three things. First, since the Thuringia and Saxony elections, the SPD have tacked towards the AfD on certain issues, including immigration and Ukraine, to stem the bleed of socially conservative SPD voters to other parties like the AfD. For instance, in just the last few weeks, Scholz has imposed controls along Germany's land borders and announced that he wants to restart peace negotiations with Russia over Ukraine. Second, Brandenburg has long been a stronghold for the SPD. They've governed the state continuously since the first post-reunification election in 1990, and they won all 10 federal constituencies in the state at the 2021 election. But third, and perhaps most importantly, the AfD's successes in Thuringia and Saxony earlier this month inspired more moderate anti-AfD voters to coalesce around the SPD. The SPD even received a tacit endorsement from the CDU's minister-president in Saxony, who said that, quote, "the strongest party needs to be a democratic party," and Brandenburg's incumbent SPD Prime Minister, Dietmar Woidke, threatened to resign if the AfD won. You can sort of see this if you look at opinion polls running up to the election. For most of the past few months, the SPD are a few points behind the AfD, but after Thuringia and Saxony, their vote spikes as voters from the other parties lend their votes to the SPD to deny the AfD another victory. Anti-AfD sentiment would also explain why turnout came in so high at 73%, 12 points higher than last time around. Nonetheless, even if tactical voting denied them an outright majority, this was still a great result for the AfD. They still came second, and they increased their vote share by about 6 points on 2019. But one of the things that makes their results so remarkable is the fact that it was in large part driven by younger voters. The AfD were by far and away the most popular party with young voters. An exit poll by Infratest DMAP found that 32% of 16 to 24-year-olds voted for the AfD. 18% voted for the SPD, 13% voted for BSW, 9% voted for the CDU, 7% voted for the Greens, and another 7% voted for the Left Party. Conversely, the SPD's success was driven by older voters. Their vote share steadily increases with each age bracket, and they won an astonishing 49% of over 70s. This ended up being electorally decisive because, well, there were just way more old people than young people in Brandenburg. Anyway, something similar happened in Thuringia and Saxony, where 38% and 31% of 18 to 24-year-olds, respectively, voted for the AfD, far more than for any other party. So, why are the AfD doing so well with young voters? Well, some of this just reflects a Europe-wide trend. As we've mentioned before, young people across Europe, and especially young men, are increasingly turning to parties often described as far-right. No one's 100% sure why this is, but polling suggests it's at least in part because young Europeans are surprisingly right-wing on social issues, at least by historical standards. Eurobarometer polling reliably finds that a plurality of young Europeans consider immigration to be the most important issue facing the EU. And while other polling has found that young Europeans are more likely to think that immigration is a good thing than older generations, they strongly prefer European over non-European immigration, and are about as likely as previous generations to support, quote, additional measures to fight illegal immigration. Unsurprisingly, young Germans are increasingly likely to cite immigration as one of their main political concerns. And in Brandenburg specifically, young voters were indeed more likely than older voters to cite immigration as one of their political priorities. This skepticism towards immigration often overlaps with a wider anti-establishment sentiment. Polling from earlier this year found that over 50% of Germans between 14 and 29 agree that the government cares more about refugees than Germans in need, and that the government conceals the truth from the people. Now, this anti-establishment sentiment used to benefit the Greens, who made electoral hay out of attacking the two main parties and were by far and away the most popular party with young voters at the 2019 Brandenburg election. However, their vote share has cratered since entering government, allowing parties like the AfD and BSW to pitch themselves as the real anti-establishment options. This would also explain why the mainstream parties did quite so badly with young voters. The AfD's vote share with 18 to 24-year-olds wasn't actually that much higher than its overall vote share. Rather, what's remarkable is the vote distribution, with the AfD so far ahead of every other party. This is unlike in other age brackets, where non-AfD voters coalesced around the SPD, and suggests that even young voters who don't vote for the AfD aren't as scared of them and aren't as loyal to the two main parties as older cohorts. What do the world's best politicians have in common? They're willing to learn something new every day. And if you think that sounds too hard or too time-consuming or just too overwhelming for you, then you haven't tried Brilliant.org. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. Like I said though, the real value here is that you can do this easily every day, truly committing to lifelong learning. Slowly, over time, you'll not only pick up new skills or get better at maths, but you also feel the satisfaction that comes with bettering yourself and staying ahead. For instance, if, like many world leaders, you want to get better at handling finances, you might want to check out the ton of new data science content Brilliant has just released, all of which uses real-world data to train you to see trends and to make better informed decisions. They're perfect for learners of any level to start or continue learning data analysis, with a full suite of new content covering data visualizations, algorithms, regression models, and more. Plus, you can gain additional insight by working with real data sets from sources like Airbnb, Spotify, Starbucks, and more. To try everything Brilliant has to offer, free, for a full 30 days, click on the link in the description.